Hi there, I'm Patti Ogilvie and I'm a senior enrollment counselor here at the Student Loan Help Group.
And I'm Sam Pettingill, and I'm also a senior enrollment counselor at the Student Loan Health Group.
So for today's session, we're going to go over a couple different terms that you may not be familiar with, as well as how to manage your student loan debt and some other great information. So we're going to get started on that right now.
All right. So to start us off, just a general question, Patty, in your expert opinion, what's the best way to manage student loans?
So that's a loaded question for sure, because there's no one right answer, but truly there are a bunch of different federal forgiveness programs out there, and a lot of people don't realize that they even have any options. So my suggestion would be to find out by either reaching out to us or Department of Education to find out exactly what federal student loan options they have. Because once you know what you're eligible for, then you can prepare a plan moving forward, either on paying down your principal or working towards one of the forgiveness programs. So in my opinion, that would be the best place to start in managing student loans.
I would agree. I mean, arming yourself with knowledge, that's really the first step.
Right. It's surprising in doing what we do and all the people that we talk to every day, how many are not aware of any of the programs that they're even eligible for. It's kind of mind boggling to me. So I think that the DOE could definitely do a better job of, putting that information out there for people for sure.
Definitely.
And then Sam, what's the first step to developing a plan that gets you back on track if you are off track?
Well, I think you kind of touched on that already, that the first step would really be to figure out what your options are. Once you know what options are available to you, what forgiveness programs you qualify for some people, you may qualify for more than one. That doesn't even necessarily mean that you aren't able to take more than one. For example, if you're going toward public service loan forgiveness, the new program that President Biden just announced is also an option. You can do both. Kind of knowing, okay, step one is I'm going to do this forgiveness program, and maybe step two is I'm going to also pursue another forgiveness program. And then step three, if you have any remaining debt left over, is how am I going to deal with the remaining debt that's left? I think once you kind of have an idea of what direction you need to go and what steps you need to take for each one of those programs, then kind of what's going to be left over. What are you still going to have to deal with at the end of the day? And that is things like paying down your principal really helps. Definitely not the first thing you should do. I've talked to some people that, for example, have been using this COVID-19 pause, the CARES Act pause, to be aggressive about paying down their debt. I spoke with somebody the other day that had spent more than $9,000 over the last couple of years on their student loans trying to pay them down. But if you're eligible for a forgiveness program, that's not necessarily the first thing you should do.
Right.
It'd be better to keep that money in your pocket if you could.
Right. So, exactly. I think too, a lot of people think that they have to be working in public service to be eligible for a federal forgiveness program, and that's not true. So definitely, like we were saying, do some research, check with us, set an appointment up with us, and we'll go over all those options with those people. Because if somebody, like you were saying, wasn't required to make payments during the CARES Act, and they're working towards one of the federal forgiveness programs, those months are counting as if they were making payments anyway. And, we could help them get a refund on those payments because those months are already going to count if they're eligible for one of the federal forgiveness programs.
Yep. And I think reaching out to us, that is the easiest step to get on track because we've already done all the research for you. When you're speaking to one of us, we're experts at this. We know what we're doing. We're going to be able to guide you in the right direction, whether we're taking care of the heavy lifting for you or whether you're doing that yourself. And that we'll be able to point you in the right steps.
And that's a great point, Sam, is that a lot of people will say, well, I called my servicer. Honestly, no offense to the servicers, but they're customer service people. They don't really know what the programs are. And if you call 3 different times to the same servicer, chances are good you're going to get 3 different answers.
Yeah,
so
I've heard that many times.
And you can't rely on the information that you're going to get. And again, no offense to the servicers. It's just their job is totally different than, their job is answering phone calls, basically.
Yeah, I know if I were dealing with, say, $100,000 balance, I would not want to rely on some random person that may or may not be giving me the right information.
I agree completely.
So, all right. So Patty, then, there's a lot of confusion, like we just talked about student loans and not understanding, what exactly is going on with your loans. I think maybe having a little bit of foundational knowledge and understanding some of the terms really helps in understanding what you're looking at when you're doing research. What are some key terms the borrower should be familiar with in the student loan industry?
So here are a few, and you jump in if I don't cover it all. There are Pell Grants. A lot of people will be issued a Pell Grant if they meet the financial criteria when they are applying for student loans. That's something that doesn't have to be paid back. That's a grant. It's given. You don't have to do anything with that. There's deferment versus forbearance. Generally speaking, people who are in school and they have additional student loans, they'll put themselves on in-school deferment, so they don't have to make any student loan payments while they are going to school. Where forbearance, that's going to put your loans on hold, and you can use it for, you know, any purpose technically. And when you do have your loans, you are granted 36 months of forbearance and 36 months of forbearance to be used the way that you need to. It's not an answer. The forbearance is definitely not an answer to your financial situation, but it will put it on pause. We've seen people go into forbearance over and over and over again, and it's just not going to get rid of your loans, and you're not working towards making qualifying payments toward one of the federal forgiveness options. So it's a Band-Aid, not an answer for sure. Then we've got subsidized loans versus unsubsidized loans. And the easiest way to explain that is one of those is going to accrue interest while you're in school or on in-school deferment, while the other one is not going to accrue interest. And then this is a big versus consolidation. Now, a lot of times, when you have federal student loans, you do not want to do a consolidation. What that does is it takes all your loans and consolidates them. Right. And you're going to wind up now taking yourself out of federal student loan status, now making you ineligible for any program that should come along down the road. So that's something that you definitely don't want to do unless you do have private loans. Then you're not eligible for anything anyway. Consolidation is going to take your loans, your federal student loans. So if you have let's say 10 student loans, and a consolidation is done, that's issued through the Department of Education, and now takes those 10 loans and different loans, consolidated subsidized, consolidated unsubsidized, and that's issued through the Department of Education. But the main thing to note is that you are still considered having federal student loans. So that's where a lot of misinformation is out there about refinance and consolidation. Two totally different things. Refinance, stay away from unless you have private loans.
And if I didn't know whether I had private loans or federal loans, how would I find that out?
So the easiest way would be you can call your servicer and ask them, or you can go to studentaid.gov and log in. If you don't have an account set up, you can set one up. And if your loans show up there, generally speaking, they're going to be federal. If none of your loans are showing up there, then they are private loans. That's the easiest way, in my opinion, to make the differentiation.
I agree.
And then Sam, as an expert, do you think it's smart for borrowers to pay down their principal to grease the interest of the life of their loan?
Well, the only time I would say that is the best strategy is when you know that you don't have any federal forgiveness options available to you, or you know that you're going to have a balance left over after the federal forgiveness program that you're working towards. So for example, if you were, say you have a $15,000 balance right now, you haven't had your loans for very long, you're not in public service. So now your options would be the Biden debt relief or income-driven repayment forgiveness, which takes 20 years. Obviously, with a $15,000 balance, if you're qualifying for the $10,000 from the Biden debt relief, now you're going to have $5,000 left over. It's not going to take you 20 years to pay that $5,000 balance in most cases, so you wouldn't probably qualify for a forgiveness program. But that's a scenario where you know you're going to have $5,000 left on your balance after the best forgiveness option for you. You can save on your interest at that point by paying down the balance early to pay down your principal to decrease the interest on the life of your loan. And the one thing to be aware of when you're doing that is that whenever you make a payment on your student loans, it's applied to your interest first. So whatever outstanding interest you have, that monthly payment is applied there. So if you have $200 of outstanding interest and you make a $200 payment, nothing goes towards your principal. So if you are aiming to pay down your principal, make sure you're aware of that. And just paying extra in a particular month is a good way to help pay down the principal, because any extra will go toward the principal once the interest is dealt with. But just make sure first that you actually do want to be aggressively paying down your balance, because unless you're in a situation like what I described, most likely you do have a forgiveness option available to you. And many of the options out there, like income-driven repayment forgiveness, will forgive the entire remaining balance once the requirements are met. So paying extra actually hurts you. That's money that would have been forgiven that you're now taking out of your pocket instead. So
Exactly.
yeah, before you decide, you know what, I'm just going to try to aggressively pay down the principal, make sure you know what your options are first. Take that first step and arm yourself with knowledge so that you are able to know that you're paying for a reason and not just money that could have stayed in your pocket.
Because I think what people don't understand, because we're all brought up, you get a car loan, pay it off as fast as you can. You get a mortgage, pay as much as you possibly can on it. Student loans, if you're working towards one of the forgiveness programs, like you were saying, the whole point is to have the lowest monthly payment that you're eligible for and have as much left over at the end of this as possible, because that's what's going to be forgiven. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. They're like, well, where's the balance going to go? And it's like, well, it's going to be forgiven.
It's gonna be gone.
Right. Exactly.
So while we're having all these conversations about interest, how can people lower the interest rates on their student loans?
So if you have private loans, for example, you can refinance those through a credit union, or there's a couple other companies out there that will refinance those for you. As far as federal loans, honestly, I don't know of a way that you can lower your interest rate. When you do a consolidation, they're going to basically give you the same terms that you already have with the interest rate. So I don't think, other than when you originally take out your student loans, that there is any way to lower that interest rate. Are you aware of one, Sam?
I am not. And if you take out a student loan, the interest rates are set by Congress each year. So if you have a fixed rate student loan, which most federal loans are, it's going to be whatever that rate was in the year that it was set when you took out your loans. So you might see, if you've had loans over a period of 10 years, that they might all have different interest rates, but there's really no way to change those once they're set. And like you mentioned, if you consolidate, you just end up with a weighted average. So it's the same as what it would have been before you consolidate.
Exactly. And I think too, just like the housing interest rates, I think people think that, you refinance and you're going to get a lower rate. Remember, we are not refinancing these loans. You guys don't ever refinance these loans unless they're private, because don't be lured away by, 2% interest or something like that, because you will pay dearly at the end for sure.
I spoke to someone a few weeks ago who had taken out a private home equity loan and paid off her federal loans that way. And she would have been eligible for the full forgiveness through the limited waiver with public service loan forgiveness. So it was really devastating for her to be like, oh my gosh, I made this into a private loan. And, it wasn't quite refinancing. It was, I now have a home equity loan that I'm paying off instead.
Right.
And that could have been forgiveness.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
definitely not the best option to just try to pay it off, by taking out more debt.
Right. So Sam, a couple other things that a lot of people aren't aware of, like what's the difference between forgiveness, cancellation, and discharge?
So those are three terms, especially now with all the changes that get thrown around a lot. And it's easy to confuse them. So forgiveness, cancellation, and discharge refer to three different types of programs. So for example, discharge programs would be programs that exist because you experience special circumstances. Like, for example, your school closed, your school defrauded you, you became disabled. So programs in that category would be things like the closed school discharge for people that have gone to schools like ITT Tech, things like borrower defense to repayment for people who were defrauded by their schools, total and permanent disability discharge. So if you become disabled and are unable to work, you can have your student loans discharged that way. Of course, there's discharge due to bankruptcy, which is kind of like a unicorn. That's something we don't see very often, but it can exist. Those are kind of the main categories that you see. And of course, if you pass away, your student loans are discharged due to death. So that's another way that your loans can be discharged. With the discharge programs, typically you don't have taxes on that discharge, but it does depend a little bit on what program and when your loans are discharged. As far as cancellation programs are not something we see very often. It would be things like Perkins loan cancellations, which Perkins loans are a special type of loan that was given out if you agreed to perform a public service, like, for example, teaching for several years after you graduated. You could have a Perkins loan that would be discharged, would be canceled once you had met the requirements. So usually when we hear cancellation, it's referring to things like Perkins loans. Now, forgiveness would be the forgiveness programs out there, like public service loan forgiveness, income-driven repayment forgiveness, teacher loan forgiveness. Those programs are all based on forgiving your debt because you have you've met the requirements of that specified program. So you've made 120 payments while working for a qualifying employer, or 240 payments for income-driven repayment forgiveness. Or in the case of teacher loan forgiveness, you've worked 5 years in a Title I school. Those programs are all based on forgiveness once you've met the requirements that the programs have set out. Generally speaking, those programs also end up being tax-free, but it does depend on the program. Like, for example, income-driven repayment forgiveness is only tax-free through 2026. So those really, it depends very specifically on the criteria of the program.
And then legislation is always changing. So that doesn't mean how things are today isn't how they're, is how they're going to be down the road. So things could get better, things could get worse, but for now, this is what we've got.
Yep.
Now, before we talk about the last point that we wanted to make, do you want to tell everybody just a little bit about the Biden forgiveness, even though it's still a little bit up in the air?
Sure. So about a month ago now, back on August 24th, President Biden announced a new debt relief program, and that's what they're classifying it as, debt relief, not discharge or forgiveness. This debt relief program is going to provide $10,000 to all student loan borrowers that are making less than $125,000 if you're filing individually or married filing separately, or if you are making less than $250,000 as someone who filed your taxes married jointly or head of household. So it's very important to know, how did you file your taxes in 2020 or 2021? If you come in below those income thresholds, the 125 for single or 250 for head of household or jointly, then you will be eligible for that $10,000 of debt relief. And that will come off of your student loans pretty much regardless of the type of loan you have, other than some special things, for example, FFEL spousal consolidations. If you have a Perkins loan that you took out for your child, it's still eligible for this $10,000 of debt relief. Now, it does get doubled to $20,000 if you received a Pell Grant while you were in school. It does not matter how many Pell Grants you receive, just receiving one is enough. If you've received at least one Pell Grant while you were in school, you're eligible for up to $20,000 of debt cancellation, as long as you meet those same income requirements, the 125 or 250. And that is always based off of either your 2020 or 2021 taxes. Now, all we know so far about the program is that there will be an application available sometime in early October, so probably in the next few weeks, and that it's projected to take 4 to 6 weeks from the time that you complete the application until you actually see the forgiveness received. So the Department of Education is putting out a November 15th date and saying, if you've applied by November 15th, we're confident that you would have it forgiven, have that remainder or that amount taken off before the CARES Act ends on December 31st. But that's really all we have so far. It could be up in the air. We have heard that there may be some legal challenges in the works. So for right now, it's really just keeping up to date and making sure that we know as soon as that's available to go.
All right. And we'll keep updating as we know more as well.
Definitely.
Thanks, Sam.
Yep. Now, Patti, one other question. We've talked a lot about, making payments on your loans, loan forgiveness, things like that. What about if you're starting to go down the wrong path? If you know that you're getting close to defaulting on your loans, you're maybe struggling with payments. For the people who are not covered in the CARES Act forbearance, that's still a possibility that you might be struggling at the moment. What tips can you give to borrowers to prevent them from defaulting on their student loans?
So first, if somebody is heading that way, definitely reach out to us, because there are some ways to remedy this before you ever go into default. Another thing is that even if you're not working towards one of the income-driven repayment programs, like for income-driven repayment forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness, you can still be put on an income-driven repayment plan. And a lot of times servicers are not very forthcoming with that information. They'll just push you into general forbearance. That'll put it on hold, but that's only going to be, again, like we talked about earlier, a Band-Aid. You're still going to have to go into repayment. And if you're not making that much money, that could benefit you in the way of what your monthly payment's going to be, that along with your household size. We've seen payments down to $0 based on somebody's income and their household size. So definitely that is something that I would look into if I couldn't afford my payment. Also, if you do have some forbearance left and you just need a small little reprieve, you can request to be put on general forbearance or, possibly even deferment. But the main thing is that, the income driven payment can save you from going into default. Because again, if you're not making a lot of money, then that's what your payment's going to be based on. And it could be the difference of like somebody with $100,000 loan balance, for example, their standard repayment is likely going to be between $700 and $800 a month. Whereas if they have a lower income, they could wind up with a $5 or $10 a month payment. And it still counts as if you were making payments. And if you're not working towards one of the federal forgiveness programs, you can always pay extra on the principal once you're able, but at least this way, you're always going to be in good standing.
Yeah.
And do you have something else to add to that, Sam?
No, I think you covered that really well. I think that's the most important thing, is just not to fall behind if you can help it. I mean, if you need to use an income driven payment for that, if you're in a situation where you really are not able to make any payments, but you also can't qualify for a low enough income driven payment, then of course a little bit of forbearance. I mean, as you said, that's kind of that's its own little band-aid, but at least that helps from preventing you from defaulting in the short term.
One thing though, do not ignore the fact that you're behind, because you will go into default. Once you go into default, the interest rate jumps to 22%. And at some point they will garnish your wages and they will just take 15% of your each paycheck, not once a month, it's each paycheck. So definitely you want to avoid that at all costs, because, I ran into a few people the past few weeks, and I know you did too, because we talked about it, that have been in default and in garnishment like for 10, 15 years. And they said, well, I owed the debt, so I'm just paying it. But what they don't realize is that it's really not doing anything to get rid of the debt. It's just keeping you from, well, really, I don't even want to say it's keeping you out of trouble, because you're already in trouble.
Yep.
Main things get out of garnishment.
Yeah, the garnishment really is more of a punishment than anything, in the sense that it's not really helping you fix the problem or pay the debt off.
No, and I can say confidently that I would say 100% of the time, if you're in garnishment, you're going to be paying a lot more than your monthly payment would have been. I can almost guarantee you that.
Yep, I would agree. I don't think I've ever seen a case where someone was being garnished for less than what their income driven payment would have been.
Right. Well, I can't think of anything else that we need to go over. Can you think of anything else, Sam?
No, I think that's really it. I mean, I think the main theme here was, try to learn as much as you can on your own, as far as things like the terminology, so that you understand it. But the best starting point would really be to speak with someone knowledgeable, like one of our counselors, so that they would be able to point you in the right direction. Make sure that you're getting the right information, especially with all of the changes happening right now and all the deadlines coming up. This is the best time to get on track if you haven't already.
I agree completely. Well, great. So next time, we'll do something maybe along the lines of all the Biden forgiveness and whatever other changes are. But I think for now, I think we've done all we can do, Sam.
All right. Well, until next time, I hope everybody out there has a great rest of their day, and stay tuned for more information from us.
We'll see you soon.